Well, I'm here in beautiful Nova Scotia. Why am I in Nova Scotia? I've never been in this time zone before. I'm actually here visiting 45 drives. If ever there were more a prolific user of ZFS, it is 45 drives and their customers. Now, 45 drives in beautiful Nova Scotia, near Halifax in Sydney, it's on the site of an old steel mill. So the steel mill was, obviously it was port, fishing, a lot of commerce, everything else. And they stay true to their heritage. It's pretty cool. There is the old steel crucible, I guess. I'm not sure what to call it exactly. They found one of those digging up the foundation of the 45 Drives building, so they added it to their campus. That's pretty cool. This is also an old coal mining community, so I feel like I've got some connection there because of my own connections to coal mining communities. So there's a lot of commonalities. But they found a way to bring high industry here in a, I don't want to call it a sleepy town, but, there are aspects. It feels very rural. It feels very sleepy. It took 4 flights to get here. But at the same time, this is exactly the kind of entrepreneurialism and, high manufacturing kind of thing that we should see more of in North America. It was really surprising. Let's take a closer look. All right, so first, 45 drives. Before I go off into the weeds about modern manufacturing and everything else, 45 drives has positioned itself in a really interesting way in terms of enterprise storage. They actually really do give a lot of the enterprise storage companies a run for their money when you're looking for bulk file storage, S3 compatible file storage, and they're getting more into Ceph clustering, high availability, which I'll talk more about in a second. But their product strategy here has been really, really interesting. It's basically a cost plus product. But I was surprised at the scale of their operation. They have a huge number of support people, a huge number of programming staff, and 45 drives is just one part of a larger enterprise that also kind of sort of involves Protocase. If you've never heard of Protocase, they're sort of the world name in prototype case manufacturing. But manufacturing is a little bit of a stretch to call it manufacturing, because typically when you're doing a prototype, you're not doing a million run production. The way that you produce a million of something and the way that you produce 10 or 100 of something is way, way different. And so Protocase is very sophisticated manufacturing, but it is very sophisticated manufacturing with its personnel. And so the cases for 45 drives, the things that'll hold 15, 30, 45, 60 drives, the Storinator XL that we have in our office, those are fabricated essentially, more or less, by Protocase. Well, at least prototypes and how they got their start and all of the detail there. And so 45 drives is looking at making products that are more appealing to the small and medium business, as well as, Homelab users, because typically there's a lot of overlap there. Like if you could get a Storinator that holds 45 drives, that's actually the AV XL chassis, but with some modifications, or a modified chassis that'll hold both drives and SSDs. Yeah, we saw that. There was a kind of timeline in the labs at 45 drives. So it's really cool to see a company that is constantly on the pulse of whatever their customers are looking for, but also asking us what we're looking for. But I get to ask about ZFS and how is the adoption of that going, and what sort of issues have you run into, what sort of fun things are happening in ZFS development that could be useful to 45 drives, and vice versa. What kind of things have you run up against with customers? 45 drives is pushing a design philosophy for a new NVMe chassis, and the software, quite frankly, has not caught up yet. And so with that as a development platform for making things better in ZFS land, that could very well be a thing. I could see putting this kind of chassis into ZFS developers' hands so that the world of ZFS improves for all of the rest of us. At the Creator Summit for 45 drives, there were many other creators there: Techno Tim, Jeff Geerling, Alan from HD Store, who physically built his own hard drive way back in the 80s. So, that's a lot of fun. Tom Lawrence was on remote. And last but not least, Jeff from Craft Computing. So we have a lot of opinions about Homelab and Storinators and the general direction of the enthusiast community, let's say. And so we were more than happy to share our thoughts and perspective from Homelab users, from the user forum, and from all of the engagement and everything that's there. So that was pretty cool. We also got to tour a little bit of Cape Breton and Glace Bay and the area around Nova Scotia and sailing and all that. So that was a lot of fun. What about a fuse for ransomware, where ransomware gets on your network, it starts modifying files, and then the storage server actually unplugs the naughty client that contains the ransomware? That's what Snapshield is, and I'm here to get a demo from Spencer. So walk us through.
A couple things about the environment first. We are running this as quarantined as possible. So we run most of it in a Proxmox environment with a couple VMs that are actually doing the bulk of the heavy lifting with direct connected pass-through network cards. So the file store is being run on, of course, one of our storage servers in this case, which is a physical server running a small Z pool. So with that connected, Snapshield is monitoring that connection. So if I go into my Snapshield dashboard here, you can actually see things that are going on to the server right now. So we have a couple other machines that are connected to this particular data store that are just doing some fake writes. We can see the total files that have been scored on this machine since I've turned it on. 678,000 in this case, so quite a few. Average file score, so that's part of that algorithm that we've developed for determining if a file is malicious. In this case, it's only 4. 4 is pretty low. If you go to a certain number within a certain frame of time, that is when that fuse pops. If something weird does happen, we'll see that now. So on my Windows machine, I have a copy of Lockbit. Lockbit is a very gross ransomware, mainly because it's really fast. It does something like 20,000 files a minute. So it can blitz through your entire organization's file structure within minutes, and it's just gone, right?
Defender's like, what are you doing?
What are you doing? Please stop.
But then it didn't stop it.
So,
thanks, Windows Defender.
Exactly. Notably, though,
Windows, why you got to do this?
Here am I clicking like crazy, not getting into the share. So I've already been banned.
What does the dashboard look like in that case?
So dashboard is here. So we have one event detected. That'll take a little bit to update as it gets the new file scores. But one event was detected, and you can see my user has climbed up to 216 operations within that time frame. So
216 operations in a short time frame is unusual, then.
Yeah, an average user's not doing that. Detected an event. Since we know that event was detected, we also flag all of the files that I hit during that event. So I now know the 25 files, in my case, that were actually infected in this ransomware event, which lets us do that whole lot more selective restore. Normally in a ransomware event, it happens. Now we need to roll back to a backup. That backup could have been days old, could have been weeks old. In this case, I know the 25 exact files. I can go into my snapshot that I took 5 minutes ago and pull back just those files. So I have a lot more flexibility in that event. But we can look into what that looks like. First, I'm going to get rid of this Windows machine that's currently infected. Again, the reason why we run this all in a VM, I'm just going to roll back that machine to how it was before.
It's magical. See, that's also an argument for VDI. When you get infected on the VDI side, it's like, oh, Pam, guess what? It's going to be yesterday for you. Groundhog Day all over again.
Yes,
sorry, Pam.
You, drilling holes through hard drives.
We don't do that anymore.
I still do that sometimes.
So, real-world ZFS use cases. This has got to be really exciting.
Yeah, there is a lot of them and very few we haven't done. So, I mean, just, you got your classics, right? Standard file sharing stuff, of course, SMB, NFS, etc. You got your really obscure guys too, though, right? Think like massive AI workloads that the average person just doesn't ever have access with, talking like tens of millions of these super small data set files that people use to recombine into, like AI learning models, right? Those type of workloads on ZFS in particular are interesting because they're hard to accomplish in just like a bunch of hard drives, right? You kind of get past the realm of reasonableness in data rates. So you have to start using those features in ZFS that are so unique. Things like the special VDEV, for example, for that high metadata workload, ramming the thing full of RAM so you get your big ARC cache. And all of those are not really things that you can do effectively in other file systems, right? And those workloads start to collapse really quickly.
Yeah. So a lot of customers in the scientific space, a lot of government and aerospace customers, a lot of, I don't want to call them prosumer and prosumer enthusiasts, but with really big multiple sets of systems, ZFS send, ZFS receive, and really robust in terms of data storage. But also you guys have Houston, your cockpit enhancements, which also makes life a little easier, and a lot of real world customer stories with that.
Yeah, exactly. So Houston has made Linux system administration a lot easier, right? So we have a lot of customers that we're moving away from traditionally Windows environments, right? A lot of people are used to doing Windows administration, all that stuff. And those people in particular find jumping into a command line immediately to be daunting, right? It's too much of a jump, too little time to do it. Houston gets that kind of smoother transition path. You can still go into your UI, you can still manage your volumes, you can still create all of that stuff without needing to be that, Linux system guru that everyone thinks of with a hoodie pulled up hiding away in a corner.
It's really nice to see real world ZFS use cases, because you guys also have like the Stornado, and some of what you're doing with ZFS, you've bumped up against some of the performance limitations of ZFS to do with memory copies, and a lot of those fixes are now in mainline ZFS. They're not quite out yet, but again, real world customers doing real world things.
Yeah, and we'll soon be able to play with those fixes. Less so in the all flash space, oddly enough, but in the hybrid space, where people are doing a mix of HD and SSD in kind of the same unit with the same workflow, being able to leverage that higher performance storage, but on a smaller footprint, right? Video production, in particular. A lot of people will have a flash pool that they will use for, maybe you proxy a file onto it and they edit off of that. And then the actual main file is kept on HDD and they push that back later. So you have this really efficient workflow where your most recent data is all on flash, that high performance ZFS pool, and then your bulk storage is on.
That's kind of what we do with our Stornator, but also this kind of dovetails with what you guys are doing with Ceph. 45 drives is really on the bleeding edge of Ceph installations and real world customer uses. They've pushed it farther than I thought possible. Ceph the project has come a long way, and I don't think anybody really recognizes how far it's come, because I was astonished at what you guys have accomplished with Ceph and ZFS and the tiered storage and everything else. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Ceph in particular has for a long time had that reputation of being hard to manage, or even hard to deploy, hard to manage, but a difficult undertaking to take as a system administrator or an infrastructure guy. We've tried to make that as simple as possible, but also just the Ceph community has made that a lot better. Particularly in the past, probably 4 major releases, going back to Nautilus. We're currently on Quincy, so four releases ago, has made Ceph a lot more streamlined. Use case wise, there's very few things I wouldn't do on Ceph. We're kind of unique in that we're doing a lot of traditionally single server use cases on Ceph. Ceph has always been really popular in the HPC world, right? If you're doing medical imaging, if you're doing high performance compute, if you're doing AI workloads, Ceph is great for that. Ceph has always existed there in academia. Where Ceph hasn't been is if I'm running my business file server. And that has traditionally been because Ceph is complicated. We're trying to make Ceph not complicated. Our business here at 45 drives / Protocase, our sister company, we run all of our business off of one Ceph cluster. And that's everything, every workstation, every pod in the production facility, all connects to that one cluster.
Impressive performance too, and you guys answered the Reddit Ceph challenge, but it was only 10,000 IOPS, and they were able to beat it.
Yeah, exactly, and that was on SATA SSD as well, which a lot of people will think, well, 10,000 IOPS on a SATA SSD, not a big problem, but then you're not taking into account there's a lot of overheads in Ceph, right? Yeah. Network in particular, right? I have to wait for my write to be committed to every other copy that's going through, has to come back and then go through, right?
Yeah, doing that with Ceph is hugely impressive. But it's also lowering the barrier to entry for truly clustered solutions and true high availability. Even though it's got a lot of overhead, and even though we're talking about 10K IOPS performance for Ceph clusters, that entry level cost for that is so low that why wouldn't you go with a clustered solution and get high availability? And that is you got to watch that, because I think it's going to be disruptive.
Yeah, particularly in that, like, as a traditional file server market that Ceph hasn't been in. Ceph has always been in that HPC, but if you're just running your business file server, you don't need that 100,000 thread big old CPU machine pulling a bunch of threads out of a Ceph cluster. You need probably a 1 gig, maybe a 10 gig connection in most typical offices. Ceph can accomplish that in spades, and you get that availability, you get that self-healing, you get that self-balancing. More importantly, you don't get that 2 a.m. call when your Z-pool fails.
Yeah. the accessibility of these clustering technologies and the barrier to entry is so low that everybody should be doing this. I mean, we were talking about even Homelab stuff. It's like, oh, you can deploy a 3-node Ceph cluster in your Homelab. And really the problem with high availability and scaling there turns into things like, well, Nextcloud really wasn't built for scaling. And, you know, a lot of these PHP applications, they really weren't built to scale in exactly that way. It's like, oh, we can run it in Kubernetes. And it's like, well, then you get your ingress controller and everything else. And
might as well just set up a full OpenStack environment at that point.
yeah, I mean, it's just, it's complicated, but I like seeing what 45drives is working on. So this has been fun.
Yeah, it's been great having all of the creators here all day. 2 days now, I guess. Got a lot of great feedback from you guys, particularly on the Homelab. Looking forward to working with you guys more.
Neat. The other big thing that 45drives wanted to talk about is their Homelab stuff. It's a not super modified AV15 chassis for the Homelab community, maybe around $800 US. I did a live stream with 45drives, you should check that out. But this is for the pro user that is looking for something like a 45drives chassis at home. Standard ATX motherboard, standard ATX power supply, but you've got their drive cage. 45drives also has some more stuff planned for the Homelab. I mean, there is the Storinator Junior, which is, you know, a bit of a joke product, but it is something interesting. There is something interesting going on there because it can be ARM-based, and you want, you know, a Raspberry Pi powering your storage solution. Okay, we're not there yet, but soon, maybe. The modular design mean that they can do less than 15 drives. You could do 4 or 8 drives for a Homelab type solution. You could do something low cost based around a different compute platform. But the Homelab stuff isn't quite ready yet. 45drives is cooking up a lot of interesting stuff, and the software stack will be just as important. So we'll have more on that later. All too often, and we have this on our forum too, there are folks that, you know, they set up their own ZFS array, and, you know, all of their confidently incorrect advice stems from whatever they did 2 or 3 years ago. And I have never seen more development on the ZFS code base in the last 6 months than I have in the last 5 years. Things are moving dramatically fast. Resilvering, you know, and this is old news, but resilvering basically runs at drive speed pretty much all the time. And so if you build yourself a test ZFS pool and you pull a drive and then you do a test resilver having loaded up a bunch of data on those drives, if it doesn't run at the speed of the slowest drive in the array, you've done something wrong. Your VDEVs are probably too wide. And, you know, I hate to speak in absolutes and generalities because there are corners that you paint yourself into and you don't want to do that. It's like, this is more of like a VM hosting workload and we're going to need more IOPS. And it's like, okay, more VDEVs, you know, RAID Z1, RAID Z2. It's like, this is just file archives and everything else. Okay, well, maybe we can do that. What's the performance of hosting a VM on a spinning Rust array versus you know, SSD arrays? Because SATA SSDs, a lot of customers are moving to, you know, the 4 terabyte constituent component SSD arrays because it's just so darn fast. And then, you know, the overhead of ZFS matters a little bit less. But you can get good performance for VM hosting from arrays that are comprised of spinning Rust. That is entirely a possibility. You can do it. And so now I've got some of the data to back that up. Now, if we talk about Ceph, we talk about clustering, and that is the direction that 45drives is moving in with Ceph. The barrier to entry for those clustered solutions is only marginally more expensive than a non-clustered solution. So why wouldn't you opt for a clustered solution? And that's what they said. They said a lot of their customers are looking at it and moving to that. They have a lot of customers in higher education and government and the commercial sector that these things have started out as like their archive and their backup appliance. And it's like, it's only like 10 or 15% more. We'll go for the clustered solution. And then they get that in and they run it for a year or two. And the reaction is, holy crap, this actually works better than the commercial solution that we have for high availability. It's faster and more reliable and blah, blah, blah. And so, yeah, we're just, let's go whole hog and deploy this, which is really, really nice to see. And it's really nice to see that they have a support team and programmers and developers that can really get into the nitty gritty and diagnose and solve customer issues, even customer issues when it's related to integration. I was surprised at the number of support tickets that we talked about where it was really like an SMB integration to some third-party thing. And 45drives was still willing to try to troubleshoot that and work with the vendor and see if they could find a workaround for an issue that was ultimately not on their end. Exploring the rest of the campus, I see where 45 Drives gets that work ethic and ethos, because with the tour of ProtoCase, and ProtoCase, you know, they're ITAR, which means that you don't want to have a camera in the protocasing area because they have a lot of customers. And so I have some footage from that, but I'm not going to put any of it in a video because I would want to send it and get clearance for the video, and I'm not going to do that. You know, when you think machine shop, you think, you know, grizzled, haggard individuals, but no, this is high technology. There was there were a lot of stories from the machine operators where they are pushing the machines to the limits. They would get a machine that was designed in Germany, or a machine that was designed in Italy, or even Cincinnati tools, and then they would report back to the machine tool manufacturer and say, this is how we're using it, you know, it's breaking down in this way, or we're finding that this part is wearing out, you know, prematurely, what's going on? And it was like, okay, what volume of parts are you sending through it? And it's like, you're sending how many parts through this? And it's like, yeah, we work 24 hours a day, 5 days a week, making prototype cases and everything else, and we've streamlined our process to be as efficient as possible because these machines are not super idle. And getting a prototype, you know, metalworking turned around in 2 to 3 days, typically, as you do with ProtoCase when you're doing, you know, scientific experiments or you need a prototype case or whatever, had been unheard of in the industry until ProtoCase. And so that sort of philosophy of efficiency and everything else has been pulled over into 45 Drives. So a lot of things that I was like, how are they doing that? And it's, well, okay, now it makes sense. Now I can see it. Now I sort of understand. So this has been a really interesting look into the mechanical parts, pun intended, of 45 Drives. But also, I really like the horizon here. There are a lot of enthusiasts in our audience that are looking for 45 Drives type products. And I'm really happy with the direction that I see them going for the 45 Drives, you know, Homelab products. You know, here's a rack mount chassis or a tower chassis. It can go in a tower configuration. They'll hold 15 mechanical hard drives, and you can bring your own motherboard. You can bring your own electronics. You can use a standard ATX power supply. You can use, you know, server-style redundant power supplies if you don't care about noise. You can mount, you know, rubber dampened fans. You can go with, you know, high airflow fans. Whatever you want to do in terms of your own build to customize it, you can totally do that. And they've even got some other things planned in the roadmap beyond that. There's also Storinator Junior, which is run by Raspberry Pi, and it's a little bit joke, but it's also a little bit like, is there something here? Can we do something with that? And the lab is always cooking up something interesting. So it was really amazing meeting all the 45 Drives folks. It was super overwhelming. Thank you for saying hi. And they had a meet and greet for you know, people in the public, and there was a lot of people in the Nova Scotia community that are like, oh yeah, YouTube, this is what we use for entertainment around here. Hello, how's it, you know? So it was a lot of fun to meet the level 1 fans that are here, which is surprising, but okay. Hello, how's it going? A lot of fun. Thanks 45 Drives for having me out, and I look forward to future content. It's going to be interesting. I'm Wendell, this is Level 1. I'm signing out. You can find me in the Level 1 forums.